So, and again, I apologize if I mispronounce anything, but Belin Sinajani, who identifies as he, him, is Dene and Filipinx, and he is from Manatneocha in New Mexico. He is currently a researcher in mathematics education for West Ed, which is an education nonprofit. Belin's primary research interests pertain to issues of social justice and equity in mathematics education through Indigenous perspectives. Prior to his work at West Ed, Belin was a mathematics faculty member at, can we all say? SFCC in the house. And prior to that, a faculty member at IAIA. Belin received a BS in mathematics from the University of New Mexico with a doctoral dissertation, and a PhD from the University of Arizona in mathematics with a doctoral dissertation that explored notions of mathematical identity in the context of Indigenous and Latinx students. Belin, thank you for coming today.
Thank you, SJ. That's a she Belin Sinajini Yenisha. Ilakana Nishne, Tachini Bashichi, Ilakana Dashichi, Sanajina Dashanella, Santa Fe, New Mexico, de que hashte. Akot ego de Denishle. Hola, ¿cómo está? Mi llamo es Belin Sinajini. Hello, my name is Belin. And I'm really grateful to SJ for the invitation to come back, and really thankful for the warm welcome back here. And, there's lots I miss about teaching and instruction, but really happy that I'm able to stay in Santa Fe and hopeful that can maintain and sustain relationships. First of all, the title of this session, Intersections of Accessibility, Inclusion, and Belonging. I'm grappling with these notions and these ideas, and these are going to be ongoing. And a lot of times I frame presentations as these are still rough ideas and rough thinking and formulation. So I'm going to invite all of you to engage in the rough ideas and rough draft thinking along with me. And I have ideas of what I have in mind, but I'm anticipating that there will be other considerations that other ideas I haven't considered just yet, and possibly some things I hadn't considered that I'll need to incorporate into further presentations and ways of thinking. So I'm here, and I've been back and forth with some conferences and haven't been present here all day. So I have less of an idea of the conversations you've had so far today, less idea of how you've been engaging with each other. So kind of want to take a moment and have you think to yourselves, knowing you being here and present all day and I haven't been, who's been engaged all day and in what ways? How have people been participating? Who's been heard a lot throughout the day, and whose voices in this room have yet to be centered? So I just wanted to pause and take a moment for you to think to yourselves and think about how you may act on that in this upcoming session and beyond. There we go. So to start off, and it's not essential to read all of this text. It's here just to kind of set the frame of some things that I think about. As SJ mentioned, a lot of my thinking comes from engagement with mathematics and mathematics education. And with that have been a lot of conversations about promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEAM fields and STEM fields, and there's a lot of projects and initiatives, both locally and nation and worldwide, that go into thinking about how to improve equity, diversity, inclusion in mathematics. And in worlds of academia and worlds of creating initiatives and project proposals that incorporate a lot of buzzwords, it often tends to be a loss when we rattle off these words about what those words can truly mean and the various takes of what that can incorporate. So this is from a blog from a colleague of mine who's also in mathematics education. She's a Black woman who is also has a background in teaching. And her blog kind of talks about a Twitter event that was meant to look at ideas of mathematical teaching and diversity and equity in mathematics through Twitter, and thinking of Twitter as a medium where more voices could be heard and where things about equity and accessibility and conversations about that could be incorporated and highlighted and brought up. However, as she engaged in it, she felt that there was some sense of engagement and inclusion in that, but she couldn't help but notice to what extent was she feeling welcomed. And she asked about the conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion. When those words get rattled off and everyone kind of signs on, yeah, we want diversity, equity, inclusion. I think she questioned how often people really ask themselves, why is that the right thing to do? Why do you want me here? So she was questioning why she felt wanted there. And if she's not there, what do people miss by her absence? So it's one thing to hear all those buzzwords and conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. One metaphor is to have a seat at a table. Is that often enough? Is it often enough to be represented? In what way? What does that mean? So I'm hoping that we can dig into, so I'm skipping ahead to this image. The title of this talk is about intersections of accessibility, inclusion, and belonging. And kind of the math way, and people who think about logic ways, we think about intersections as looking at where things are similar, where things are the same. But there's also value in considering the outer parts there, where things are different, and what we do with those differences. So I'm going to invite us to discuss in our groups, kind of going through those components as we think about the intersections of those terms. Accessibility. What does accessibility look or feel like? And what are indicators of accessibility? So I invite you to take a few minutes in your group, again, knowing and after reflecting who's been participating throughout the day and who you feel that hasn't been heard, ways you can respectfully bring each other in. So take a few minutes and kind of discuss at your tables responses to your questions. Or you can feel where you're not in a room.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, everyone. Yeah, how are you doing?
Nice to see you.
Nice to meet you. Hi.
Yeah, they're being thoughtful at the moment. I haven't posted anything, so.
We're going for Spring Mexico. We're going for Spring Mexico. I got hired in 2018. Yeah. My name was already on. Was it still enrollment? Current enrollment. When I was here, yeah, yeah. Hola. Thank you. Any discussion? Okay. Or you can ask them. Okay. Are they willing to say something? I'm gonna come back and do the next one, and I'm gonna come back to them. So we won't share out what? Oh, we'll share out the next one. Okay, so raising my hand, and I want to get through some of the intersections. So I apologize. We're gonna continue on these conversations, but to as a prompt to continue the next part of the conversation. There we go. We're going to kind of do this in two parts. Similar questions for inclusion. So we talked about accessibility. What is inclusion? What does inclusion look or feel like? What are the indicators of inclusion? And to do our first look at intersections. As you discuss inclusion, compare and contrasts to some extent. If you provide accessibility, does it automatically imply inclusion? Are there some examples of inclusive interventions that do not necessarily promote accessibility? And can you provide some examples of accessible interventions, things that we do in the name of accessibility, that do not necessarily promote inclusion? So we'll take a few moments. I'm going to try our best to stick to our time here. We'll take 4 minutes. Do they have any questions?
I don't understand the meaning of inclusion. What does it mean?
Do any of you have ideas what inclusion means?
¿Y alguna de ustedes, las demás, tienen ideas de lo que podría significar inclusión? Inclusión viene del verbo incluir. Incluir, ¿sí sabe qué es incluir? Right? Inclusion comes from the word include. Right. So you know what include is? Yes. Could we say that it would be, you can count on me, or I can count on you?
Okay. Yeah.
This is not.
There's no right answers. It's what you think.
No, correcta o incorrecta. How? Giving your opinion or how?
Yeah, in your opinion. What does it feel to be included?
¿Cómo siente usted cuando piensa que la incluye? Well, to me, it's like when they take me into account.
You too?
As when they pay you more for your work.
Mm-hmm.
When they value your work. There is a meeting, there is a gathering, and they take you into account. That too.
So, a reason I want them to speak first is if they haven't spoken, I want to demonstrate that I want to value their voices.
La razón por la que yo quería algunos de ustedes hablen, si es que no han hablado antes, es para demostrar que sus cosas están siendo escuchadas. Pueden escuchar algo.
But it's up to you.
Pero es cosa de ustedes.
I'll let them think about it, then I'll come back. Yeah. Okay. So, hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Hands up. Hands up. Is anyone willing to summarize some of your thoughts, your group's thoughts, and not just thoughts in the sense of answer finding, but you can share some thoughts you have, some questions and challenges that you might have identified. Who's willing to share? Steven.
Bilingualism is a good example. We accept people, anyone who wants to sign up for a college course, but if they're bilingual and if their English is not at a good enough level for the class, they're really at a disadvantage. They're not included. It's accessible, and it's also, personal. If they don't understand something, they feel embarrassed a lot of times, ashamed. They don't want to ask, they don't want to demand more attention. It's on them. Bilingual students should have higher achievement levels. But when they're not included, when the teaching and the institution doesn't include them in the way it sets up its courses and everything, they're at a disadvantage. Statistically, kids in school who are bilingual fall behind farther and farther every year when they should be advancing every year. Is that what you're thinking of?
It's not what I'm thinking of, it's what you all are thinking of. Do others have similar thoughts? So I think there's an attempt to bilingualism and the idea of offering bilingual classes in theory should promote student success, achievement, and advancement. Is that kind of like what we're saying? But what's happening, that's not what's happening. Is that what you're kind of saying? So that kind of necessitates an examination as to whether that intervention intended to provide accessibility is actually promoting inclusion. Is that kind of a gist of what you're saying? Yeah, so I think that's a good way to think about it. That's thinking about what questions are coming out of this. And I'm not here to come with answers, just generate discussion. Anyone else like to share? Yes.
So we were talking about one of the things that we learned during COVID, having to move to an online teaching modality very quickly, kind of across the board. We noticed a lot of our students didn't have the connectivity, the internet accessibility, and having to respond sort of quickly to that with hotspots and other interventions that might assist them. However, again, looking at, is the student able to come to campus to pick up that equipment, and just really a lot of the challenges that came from that time.
Yeah, so I think there's different notions of accessibility. Some of it we hear about internet accessibility. Some of it is accessibility that's language related, and many ways to think about accessibility. And again, there's no direction I'm really thinking about where we're going here, just opportunities to think and critically examine what you're doing. Where are we at with time? Oh, we're almost out of time. So belonging is kind of a big one here too. What is belonging? What does belonging look and feel like? And what are the indicators of belonging? And while we're at it, let's think about these intersections. Can we think of examples of where we have all three occurring at once? How do we know that all three are occurring at once? Accessibility interventions support senses of inclusion and promote sense of belonging. Are there interventions that fail to do and support those other circles? Can we generate some examples here? I believe we have till 2:40, so let's take about 3 or 4 minutes here.
I know.
How often have Zoom people been able to share?
Conversation back and forth. I would say there's about 10 people chatting.
Okay. Anything that you think could be highlighted from the chat?
About being believed, that it's important to believe for the position that you have and our experience, the things you're experiencing. There were some comments about language, but I think they were addressing bigger through. But an ideal situation is that a student doesn't need to ask for accommodation or accessibility, but that it automatically exists within the classroom.
That is part of our
Yeah,
thinking.
yeah. Automatically. That's kind of some of what they're talking about.
Okay. I might come to you and have you summarize,
Okay.
even at that last point too.
Okay,
When
okay.
I come back to you. Thank you.
Yes.
I think they would like to run. They are not. They don't have application.
Okay.
No.
Oh, okay. Okay. Hi.
Aquí viene el compañero a hacerles preguntas.
Do you have questions too or thoughts that you all might be willing to share? Do you feel included? Do they feel like they have a sense of belonging and included here?
Pues yo te digo, yo no sé.
What helps? What helps with that? What helps them to feel like they are included and belong?
¿Qué les ayuda a sentirse incluidas? They include. They give us the interpretation equipment that makes us feel included.
Gracias. Thank you. Okay, so let's come together. Okay. Hands up, hands up. All right. Is there a group of tables, person, and I'm going to help have you self-identify? And I don't mean to put someone on the spot and talk who hasn't spoken yet, but maybe you could summarize or articulate an idea that someone has had. Okay. And have you be given a chance to speak.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Esteban Roybal, and I'm the degree audit technician in the registrars. What we talked about in terms of this diagram, just shouting out TRIO and their office and what they do, we really think that they do a great job in terms of all three of these areas. They have online teaching and learning, so that's for our students and teachers. They have extra tutoring. One thing that we think is great is the new student orientations, and one thing that we kind of said is like, being in trios, kind of having like an NSO every day, because you're going to learn every day. It's just how do we get students there and have them on campus all the time? That's the big disconnect, I think, right now.
Thank you. Other tables who have not yet spoken throughout the day. And by saying that, I'm realizing that by emphasizing verbal ways of sharing, that I'm discounting non-verbal ways of sharing, non-oral ways of sharing. So there are many ways that we may want to think about how we promote accessible interventions and inclusion. And kind of along the lines with that, this isn't and all be all, but I would like to ask Val to share some things that are happening online.
Sure. We've had a couple discussions, and I'm not going to get to all of them, but we're kind of summarizing our learnings this afternoon. Ashley Valdez says, in my opinion, belonging is the root of everything that we're discussing. If someone feels like they belong, it's because all the other pieces fall into place and make a person feel heard, welcome, and even understood. And this is stemming a little bit from a previous part of the conversation about being believed, that if you have an experience, no matter where you're coming from or what your position or place of intersectionality may be, to be believed, no matter what your experience is or what the person you're talking to's experience may be. So that's an important part of feeling belonging too. And just finally, Kate Stutter says, I think one place is accessible and inclusive. People can feel inherently that they belong there because there are not structural or social barriers in place. So an automatic sense of belonging, not because a person has had to take action, but because everything is already set up for them.
Thank you. Thank you, Val. Any others who would like to share? Yay.
Hi, Monique. I work in the testing center, and our group was talking about how can we make people feel like they belong with such a large and diverse campus. And one of the ideas we were talking about were cohorts, which our nursing program does and our teaching program. I did the teaching license program here, and it was a great way to feel like I had a group of people who really understood what I was experiencing. I could learn and grow with them, and then I had to get back to work because there's a lot of our students who just come to learn and then they got to go back to their lives. So it would be great if we had more things on campus where people could feel involved, but not all of our students are those kinds of learners. So it'd be a great way to have accessibility, inclusion, and belonging if we could have more cohorts.
Hi, I'm Todd. And the way I was processing this, I just want to think out loud just for 1 second, is like, could I put these into silos? I see they're overlapping. So that was my exercise. And I think about like real world environments where you might have belonging and that feels great, but without the accessibility piece, you're just like an exclusive golf club or something. Without inclusion, if inclusion is just by itself, that might be a standalone attribute, but the accessibility might be an impermeable little orange circle somewhere that people can't get into. So I see and accessibility is the same way. It's kind of like enchanting, and you just be like, anyone can do this, and this is great. But if it doesn't have teeth, if there's not substance, ballast behind accessibility, then these other things are meaningless. People will go and they'll have an experience that doesn't have depth. And so that's it. That's all I was thinking about.
Thank you. I'm gonna check my time. Oh, so right up at the end of time. And I want to thank you for your rich discussions and your dialogue today. One reflection I'd like to share is that jumping in at 2:00 on Friday, what's today, the 20th, October 20th, 2023. We're not jumping in at the beginning of these conversations here. We're not jumping in advocating like, hey, let's start thinking about these things. There are many things already taking place here at SFCC, and it's valuable to highlight where some of those interventions and those efforts are taking place and to value and highlight them. But I'm also noting and hearing that we're not near the end of this either, of these dialogues and these processes. And I think it's important to continue to engage in ongoing conversations and to think about and grapple with our own limitations in critical and reflective ways. So, by example, I wish I had come up with better images and had taken more time to provide more multimodal ways of participation that go beyond just passing the microphone out, because not everyone who has ideas and thoughts worthy of sharing is going to be comfortable sharing in front of a big audience. That trust has to be earned and demonstrated over time. And by prioritizing this oral way of sharing knowledge, it's not being accessible for a lot of people's ideas and rich ideas, and limits both their sense of belonging and their ways of feeling included. So even though we might think that we're being accessible, anyone can, but that's not always promoting a sense of inclusion and belonging. So I'll continue to think about how I can promote and think about these kinds of sessions in the future, and invite you to continue on in this journey with me and with your own work. But thank you for all that you do, and Happy Friday afternoon. I know there's more coming on. Go ahead.